Hi, my name is Rebecca Devaney and I'm going to be talking to you today about beading. I'm sitting here in Auvers-à-Soie, which is the showroom of the most famous company in Paris and France for making silk threads. The reason that I'm here is that I moved to Paris to study embroidery at École Lesage. I spent 6 months training to become a haute couture embroiderer and then spent the next 2 years working as a contract embroiderer for Chanel, Dior, Versace, Louis Vuitton, and so on. So I really enjoyed working with all the beautiful materials, particularly the beads and the sequins. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you two techniques. I'm going to show you how to add on beads using the tambour hook or the luniville, le crochet de luniville, and I'll also be showing you how to add on beads using needles à l'aiguille. So the first technique I'm going to talk to you about is the tambour hook embroidery technique or the crochet luniville. So first things first, I'm going to introduce the materials. So this here is a tambour hook in English or a crochet de Luniville in French, and it comes from the town of Luniville, this technique that I'm going to show you today, and that's why it's called crochet de Luniville in French. So there's a little bit of history. So it has this wooden handle and then it has this crochet hook at the bottom, and you use the crochet hook to catch the thread and couch your beads in place, and I'll be showing you how to do that in a minute. The next material that you have is your thread, okay? So your thread, you're always using fil à gants, which was originally gloving thread. If you can't get fil au chinois, fil à gants, it's a strong waxed cotton thread, and that's what you want to use always for adding on your beads and your sequins. The next material that I have is, you will all know about this. This is your embroiderer's scissors. So you want to have a very good scissors with you to cut the tiny threads. And you want to only use this for your threads or for a little bit of fabric. You need to take very good care of this. The next material that I have is, of course, beads. Okay. So in Paris, you can find lots of beautiful beads. You can buy them new or you can find them in the flea market. And they are generally sold on these little pom-pom, so pom-poms of beads, okay? And what you do is you take usually just one string of the beads and then you add them onto your thread. So you can see my beads are pre-strung on my thread, and we always do that for the Luniville hook technique, which I'm going to show you now. So now that we've had a look at the Luniville hook technique, I'm going to show you how to add beads and sequins using a needle. Not everybody likes using the tambour hook technique, and it's certainly not the best technique or anything, higher quality about it. What it allows us to do when you're using the tambour hook is to work quickly, okay? You can also use your needles, all right? And that's the traditional way to do it. And there's lots of ateliers here in Paris who still add beads and sequins using needles, all right? And the work is still just as beautiful. So the needles that I'm using, I brought 2 packets today just in case you don't have access to the same materials. So these are Boin needles. Boin are a French company and they've been making needles and pins for over 200 years. And these are the needles that you would be using in an embroidery atelier. The size that I have here are 10 and 12. They're the finest, the thinnest needles. The next needles that I got are John James. So John James are an English company. And again, you'll see their needles are just as thin, okay? And you want to keep these very carefully because, as you can imagine, they are very easy to lose. So you want to keep them in your fabric at all times. That's a little rule. So we've got our needles, okay? And then it's the same materials, really. You've got your scissors. You've got your thread. You're using the fil à gants, the waxed cotton thread again, okay? Because it's the strongest thread and it's easiest to bead with that. And then obviously you have your lovely selection of beads. Now I know you're working with pearls, so I brought along, they're not real pearls, but I brought along pearlescent beads with me today, and I'm going to show you how to be working with them as well. So let's get looking at the needle. So now I have my crochet de Luniville hook ready. I have my beads on my thread and they're all ready to go. I'm going to show you how to set this up now, because actually I'll be using my hook on the surface and I'll be adding my beads underneath the embroidery frame, and I'll show you what that looks like at the end. So now let's get started. So I place my hook into the fabric and I bring my thread underneath the fabric here. So I'm going to do a starting stitch, and you can see I'm holding the thread here between my two fingers. I bring the hook straight down, I turn it around, and I pull the thread up to the surface. Now I hold the thread down with my little finger like this, and then I bring the hook back in. So I'm doing a starting stitch here. I catch the thread, I turn the hook around, and I bring the thread up. I've caught that thread there in the hook. I bring the thread back. Okay, I bring the thread up through that loop. I bring the thread back down again into the same hole. I catch the thread in the hook and I bring it up. So I've done 3 little stitches there. You see I have a lovely loop, and this is my starting stitch. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do my first stitch is move the hook forward, catch the thread, and bring the hook through that little loop. So I'm going to show you the stitch first. I move the hook forward, I catch the thread, I turn the hook and bring it to the surface. I turn the hook around again, facing forward. I bring the hook into the top of the fabric. I loop the thread around. I twist the hook, I pull it up, and I move forward. So what you might be able to see here on the fabric is the tiniest little chain stitch. Okay, so it's a chain stitch that we're working with when we're using the Luneville hook. Now I'm going to start adding on the beads. Now that we understand the stitch, I'm going to start adding on the beads. So I bring the hook down, I catch the beads here in my hands, you can see. Okay, then I separate out the beads. I place the bead behind the needle. Okay, and then I wrap the thread around the hook as we've been doing, and I bring the hook to the surface. I move the hook forward. I bring up the next little bead. I place the bead behind the needle, behind the hook. I bring the hook to the surface and I continue on. So I bring the hook down. I place the bead behind the hook. I wrap the thread around the hook and I bring it to the surface. And I'm going to keep on doing this nice and slowly so that you can see what I'm doing. And we'll just do a little line of beads. So what I'm actually doing here, you might notice, is couching the beads. I'm not stitching them down. This is a couching stitch. So we see the chain stitch on the back of the fabric, and then on the front of the fabric, we'll see the beads couched down in place. That brings me on to the next point. When we're working with the Luneville hook, we are working on the back of the fabric. Okay, so I chose an organza today. This is a silk organza that I'm working with because I want you to be able to see what I'm doing underneath the fabric. Okay, normally when embroiderers, Luneville hook embroiderers, Lunevilloise, are working with an opaque fabric, they can't see what they're doing. Okay, they have to learn, or we have to learn, how to feel what we're doing. Okay. Or you also need to learn how to check your work regularly. That's very, very important. So they say here that embroiderers have their eyes in their fingertips. All right. Now I've added on maybe 10 or 15 beads here. So what we might do is turn our frame around so that we can see what's on the other side. I'm just going to do a little finishing stitch here, okay? So I'm going to show you how to do that. So I have my loop up here. and I bring the needle back, the hook back into the fabric. I catch the thread once, and then I bring the needle back into the same hole. I catch the thread twice, and then I bring the needle back into the same hole, and I catch the thread a third time. So that's 3 tiny little stitches there, okay? And I pull it up, I take my hook out, I get my scissors, and I trim the thread here to about 1/2 centimetre, and then I trim the thread down here to another 1/2 centimetre. Now, before we move on and do anything else, I bring my thread to the top of the fabric, okay? And you can see that there's some loose beads here. So you must always tie a little knot, just a little loop, that's all, in your beads. If you don't tie this, if you don't kind of secure that last little bead there like that, you'll lose all your beads off your thread, okay? So very, very important to secure the last bead there on that. All right, now I'm going to show you what it looks like on the front. So I've turned the frame over and we're going to look at what we've done here first. So we began with a little chain stitch. When you're looking at it here, you're seeing the back of the chain stitch, so you can just see individual little stitches. Now, these are minuscule, so you mightn't necessarily see them. As we continue on, this is where I began adding the beads, okay? And you can see I've left a little bit of what we call breathing room between each bead, but they're nicely spaced between each other, okay? You can also notice that my fabric is stretched very tightly. You saw me working on an embroidery frame, and that embroidery frame keeps the fabric stretched and taut. What it means is that when you take the fabric off of the frame, when you remove it from the frame, the fabric will come together, okay? So you do want to leave that little breathing space between your beads, because if you don't, they'll be cramped and they'll be one on top of the other, okay? So you can see now it's worth your while checking your beading regularly. If you don't, you might find that you have 2 beads, one on top of the other, or that you maybe missed a space and forgot to get a bead in place as well. But you know, if you go slowly and surely and check your work regularly, it's easier to go back and correct any mistakes that you make. So now that we've checked our work on the front, I'm just going to show you again. We'll continue doing a nice bit of embroidery. So I bring my thread to the top, I bring my hook down, I bring the thread to the surface, I bring my hook back, I loop the thread, I bring it to the surface, I bring the hook down. I've done my 3 little stitches now and I'm ready to go. So in that first stitch, I'm going to bring the bead up behind the hook and move forward. Then I'm going to go again. Then I move my hook forward. I bring the bead up behind the needle and I hook it around. So as I said, this is the technique that's used by Haute Couture embroiderers, Lunévilloise, in all of the ateliers de broderie in Paris. With practice, you become faster and faster at this technique. It takes a long time to master because you have to learn this gesture, this action. But once you have learned it, as I said, it simply makes beading and embellishment faster, not necessarily better. Now, I'm going to move on from doing this in a relatively straight line to showing you how you can curve it, okay? I'm just going to move slightly to the right. And start curving these beads around. Because really, you can move the beads in any direction you want. Ooh. Normally, you would have your design printed or drawn onto the back of your fabric. And that way you can follow the design and add the beads and sequins in exactly where they're meant to be. So I'm going to, curve around again. And then we'll bring it in another direction. Over here. And we'll curve back up to the top. And out again. You can have lots of fun with this technique. And then, as I said, getting into good habits and checking your work regularly. So I'm going to add on maybe 2 more beads, and then I'm going to remind you of how to do that finishing knot. Oopla. Okay, so I have my last bead there. Then I bring my hook back in. I bring it out once, back into the same hole, out again twice, back into the same hole, and pull it through. Now you'll remember, I'm going to cut the thread. Okay, here. I'm going to trim this thread down here so that, your back is always as neat as the front. Then I bring, remembering this very important part, I bring the thread back up to the surface with the beads and I tie a little knot here. Okay, just a little loop that loops around the bead. Okay, and then I can safely store my beads. And we're going to turn the frame around so that we see what this looks like on the other side. Okay, and again, maybe only going this far before you check your work on the correct side, especially when you're getting started with this technique. Also remembering, if you do need to fix your work, that we've only been using one length of thread. So you might have lines and lines and lines and lines of this embroidery, only using one length of thread. And what that means is that if you pull that thread, and when you're learning, this often happens, you pull the thread by accident and you very, very, very quickly remove all of your work. So you need to go nice and slowly at the beginning. But that's a lovely kind of introduction to the Tambour hook or the crochet de Lunéville technique, where you're using this tiny chain stitch to couch the beads and sequins in place. You're working on the underside and then you see the beads and your work when you turn your embroidery around to the front. So now we've turned our frame around and you can see we have the lovely straight stitch here with all of those beads in a perfectly straight line. And then here we started with a straight line and we began to curve. Now you can see I've left extra space between the beads when I'm curving around these corners, because remembering that when we take the fabric off the embroidery frame, the métier à broder, the beads will come closer together. So we need this little space between them. Here, this wasn't done on purpose. We can pretend it was, but that extra space is because I did the stitch slightly too big. But that's all right. When you're, playing around and doing a sample like this, it's okay to make little mistakes like this. Okay, what you could do is I could undo that thread now. I could turn it around, undo the thread, unpick the knot, remove those 5 beads and fill in that 6th bead that's missing there. But because we're just doing a sample, I don't need to do that today. I just need to remember to space my stitches more carefully on the finished piece. So there you go. That is the Tambour hook embroidery technique, or the Luneville hook embroidery technique. So the next technique I said I'd show you is how to embroider using these embroidery needles. Okay, I have 3 size needles here. They're size 10, 12 and size 13. All right, I'm going to start with the size 13 and just see how it goes. All right, I'm again, as I said, using the same thread, the fil à gants. That's very important. Okay, this waxed cotton thread. My beads are here. I keep them in this little jar, and it is a lovely pom-pom of pink beads. Okay, now obviously I don't need the whole pom-pom. So what I'm going to do is separate out the strands like this. Okay, and then I can try and pull out this thread, and it's not coming easily, so I snip the thread, always remembering then to secure, oh well actually, well yeah, we'll keep up our good habits. So I'm going to do a little knot in this thread to secure the last bead, and then I'm going to go back to the top of the thread and cut it here. Now I can pop the pom-pom back in the jar, and then I'm going to place these beads into the lid of the jar. Okay, that just keeps things easy to use. All right, that's as much beads as I'll need. So I can tie the string again. And then pop them back into the little jar. Now, I'm going to get out these beads here. Okay, so you can see they are absolutely tiny, almost imperceptible. So when I'm not using it, I'll need to make sure to keep it in the fabric. These are very well secured in here. Okay, so when I'm not using it, I place it in the fabric. It's almost impossible to see it against the fabric, that's so thin. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is cut a length of thread. Okay, so with this kind of embroidery, you're only ever taking your thread from your fingertips to your elbow, which is about this length here. Okay, now I'm going to place the thread through the needle. Now, so once we have our needle threaded, the next thing we're going to do is our 3 tiny little stitches. So I keep the thread at the surface. I bring the needle up. I'm just holding this thread, this little tail in place. Okay, and then I bring the needle back in, just maybe about 2 millimeters. These are teensy tiny little stitches. Okay, and then I bring the needle back out again. So that's 2. And then I'm going to bring the needle back out again here. Do my last little tiny stitch, and that is 3. So we're ready to get started now. And I bring my little plate or dish of beads closer to me. Okay, I'm going to bring the needle out behind the knot. Okay, or behind those 3 tiny stitches. I place my needle into the dish like this. I secure a bead I have the needle through the bead here. Then I'm going to take the needle up with my finger, up, and that keeps it in place. You can see it here, okay. And then I place the bead over that those first securing stitches, okay. Then I bring the needle forward, okay. These first few stitches, what we're going to be doing is figuring out the spacing between our beads. So I've left a gap and I've brought the needle out, brought the thread out, leaving enough space that I think the next bead will fit into. Okay. Now I'm going to secure the bead again, and then stitch back in here. Okay, perfect. Lovely little spacing there. Then I can move forward to do the next stitch. I place the needle into the dish. I collect the bead and I do a little back stitch here. Okay, I move forward. All right, I take another little bead and I go back. I move forward. Okay, and I go back. I move forward. Okay, and I go back. Now what you can do if you want, oh, I have a little knot there, and I pull the thread through. Now, so we have this little line here, okay? If you want to kind of bring your beads together or draw them together a little closer together, you can bring your needle back through the last three here, or two, we'll do two, okay? And that draws the beads closer together. And then you simply bring the needle back like that. And we can do the same thing here. So I'm just doing securing stitches. All right. And if I feel these are a little bit wobbly here, so what I can do is also bring the needle up through, whoops, the four of them all at once and do another securing stitch if I so wish. Okay, now you don't need to do that. I'm just showing you how to do securing stitches. These secure or kind of anchor the beads in place, and they really help. You can see because we've drawn these four together, there's a little gap between these two. So just to show you how easy this is, I can bring the needle back here. Okay, and I can slip the needle through like this. And what that will do is bring those beads a little bit closer, close over that gap. Okay, then I can continue on with my line where I'm moving. We're effectively doing a back stitch, so I'm moving forward and back. Okay. Now this will go nice and slowly initially, and then, you know, you might need to speed up, and you might not. It's absolutely fine. Okay. So that now is adding your beads on in a line. What I want to show you now is how to add on volume, okay? And I'm going to finish off that last bead there. It might be a little bit small of a gap. Okay, that's fine. To finish that line, I bring the needle out between the last two beads where the stitching is, and I'll do the same thing. I'll do 3 tiny little stitches that are hidden between those beads. Okay, and that finishes that. when I have the 3 stitches done, oops, that is my 3rd stitch. When I have the 3 stitches done, the last thing I do is bring the thread up to the front. Okay, I pull the thread tight as I dare, and then I snip. Okay, and I do the same thing here. I pull the thread as tight as I dare, and I snip. Okay, so that is our finished line there. Okay, so looking really, really beautiful. So now the next thing I'm going to show you how to do is how to add beads in volume. So I'm going to give a little reminder now of our starting stitch. So you keep the tail of the thread to the surface. You bring the needle back up near where you started. You bring the needle back down again. And there we go. The tail is hopefully secure. So we do 2 stitches. And then we're going to do 3rd stitch. And that's it. That's your starting stitch, remember? That way you don't have to have any knots in your work. Now, also, I bring my needle out just behind that stitch there, okay? So that we can hide it with the first bead. I bring the needle into the little dish. I secure one of the beads, and then I use my index finger to pull it up onto the needle there. All right. And then I'm going to put it in place here. And that will hide those little tiny stitches. Okay. Now let's just say I'm going to add 3 stitches here, 3 beads here. And then as a little base. And then we're going to start adding volume. All right. Now, so what I do is bring the needle out, and I'm going to gather 1, 2, 3 beads here. So I've got, I've got 3 beads on my needle here. Okay. I'm going to bring them down. So you can see, I'll make this easy. I've got the 1, 2, 3. What I'm going to do is slip the needle back through 2 of them. Okay, so I've slipped the needle back through 2 of them there. And then I bring the needle back into the same hole and I pull through. And now I have this little tower of beads. I can bring the needle out just under the beads and do 1 little stitch again that's hidden underneath them. That's just a little securing stitch. Okay, and I can move on. Try and keep these close together. And I can add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now I've got 5 beads on that line. Okay, here. I bring them down to the base of the fabric like this. And then I slip the needle back through 4 of the beads. Okay. And then I'm going to bring that needle back in where I started and pull the needle through. and I've got 5 little beads that are standing up. Okay, so by leaving that last bead free, by only slipping the needle through the first 4, that allows for that last bead to anchor those 4 beads in place. That's very important that you have that little bead on the end. Now, we're going to add more beads than that so that you can see how to create fringing. So I'm going to give myself a little space here. Add in a bead. All right. And then move on. And here I'm going to add 5 beads again. Okay, so I've got 5 beads on that needle. Now, I mentioned, oops, I'm going to leave this in here for a minute, that I had brought some pearls. So I'm going to take out these pearl beads. So now I have a few pearls, as you can see. We're going to get very adventurous here. So I have my 5 little pink beads on already, and then I'm going to add a pearl. I'm actually going to add 3 pearls, and we'll see what happens. Okay, I'm just doing a little mix here so that you see how this works. So I've got 3 pearls, and then I'm going to add on 5 more of the beads. So I've got 5 more little pink beads here. And then I'm going to add on 3 more pearls. And I'm going to add 1 little pink bead and see if this will act as an anchor, as a stopping stitch. Okay, so when I line them all up here, this is what I have. 5 pink, 3 white, 5 pink, 3 white, and 1 pink. Now what I'm going to do is hold the thread tight. Okay, I can hold it tight like this. And then I'm going to skip that last little pink bead there and bring the needle back through. I need to hold these tight here. All of these beads. Okay, I might do it in phases. All right. And then down through these last 5 until I bring it back into the same hole. And I pull the thread through, and I pull and I pull and I pull. And then there we go. I have this lovely little string of beads and pearls that are hanging down like that. I'm going to bring my needle to the front. The most important part of this is that you have that little anchoring bead at the end, okay? So you can do your fringing as long as you want. You can add on different sizes of beads as well. You just need to make sure to have that anchoring bead at the end, and then carefully bring your needle back through every bead that's in that line. I'm going to show you this one more time, and this time we'll add on different size pearls, okay, to see if it resembles a little bit the beautiful dress that you'll be working on. So now I'm going to add on a last bit of fringing just to show you again how to do this. So I'm going to take up 5 beads. Okay, so I've got my 5 beads on my needle. I'm going to let them go down to the bottom of the needle, bottom of the fabric, just because I'm going to take up quite a few. Then I'm going to take 1 pearl. I'm going to take another 5 beads. Okay, then I'm going to take 2 pearls. Oh, if they'll come. Like this. I'm going to take another 5 beads, being very adventurous here, but I know that there's a lot of fringing in historical dresses, so this technique is important. Now I'm going to take another 3 pearls. Like this. Oops. I'm going to take another 5 beads. And then, just to be very, very adventurous, I'm going to take 2 of those beads, and then I'm going to take this irregularly shaped bead here, because to show you that you can change the scale of your beads as well. Okay, and then we'll have 1, 2, 3 at the bottom. Oops. And then always, always remembering to have that little anchoring bead here. Okay, so I have to keep that little anchoring bead. Now, so you can see this is quite a long line here. So it just means that you need to take your time. That's all. Okay, so we have a long line of beads on this. And we'll just take our time bringing the needle back through them. Okay, so I hold it up like this. I don't stitch through that last pink bead. And I bring the needle down through here as much as I can. Okay. Now I've had to stop here. So I'll bring it through these beads as well. Opa. And down through these. And then finally, I brought it down to the bottom and I can bring the needle back through here. Oops. And I pull and I pull and I pull. And now I have my last piece of fringing there. Now it's really important that you secure these in place. So you remember how to do your securing stitch. You hide it underneath the little beads here. And we're going to do 1, 2, 3 stitches. And then bring it back up to the surface. And remembering that we're going to snip it as close to the threads as we dare. Okay, and then the same on this side. You want to keep it nice and neat over here. So now I'll just recap everything we've done here. So we've looked at how to add the beads on using the needle. Okay, that's pretty easy. We've looked at how to align them if they get a little bit wobbly, or drawn them together if they get a little bit spaced out. Here we're looking at how to add beads on in volume, and we're using the technique of having that little anchoring bead at the end. We're looking at how to add on fringing. okay, using seed beads and pearl beads. Then we're looking at how to do different designs. 1 pearl, 2 pearls, 3 pearls. Then we're looking at elongating our fringing using 1 pearl, 2 pearls, 3 pearls, and remembering that we can change the size and the shape and the design of the pearls that we're using here as well. But always, always, always including that little anchoring stitch at the end. Now, we'll have a look at this when it's upright and see how the fringing sits very beautifully. So now we're getting to have a look at our finished work, which is always the most exciting part of beading. And you can see here, this is the technique where we're using the tambour or the Luneville hook. This is where we're using the needle, that very, very fine, thin needle. And then this is where we're looking at adding on volume, okay? And you can see that our fringing, when it's like this, when it's held correctly, it's absolutely perfect, okay? And it falls down really beautifully. If you're using heavier beads, it will fall even more so. And you'll have this beautiful draping and movement in your beaded fringing.